I've been listening to a lot of the FNAF 3 phone calls, Baby's stupid never-ending monologue in Night 4, over and over, rechecking things, double-checking to make sure that's how it was worded. So, the Saferoom is just strange. It's kind of an anomaly of the series' storytelling, because I mean, most of FNAF storytelling is stuff like, oh, what is this, and we don't have enough pieces, or the pieces don't fit cleanly, or whatever. This is one where the pieces actually do fit together, and they don't really contradict each other, and there's plenty to work with, but the picture they paint doesn't really make much sense. Okay, first things first, ground rules. These are hardcore rules that can't be changed because they're established things stated objectively. FNAF 1 is after FNAF 2. Phone Guy references the bite of 87 being in the past, which means we're not in the year 1987 anymore. You don't declare, oh yeah, the bite of 87, if it wasn't some historic event. Or if it was like last month. Secondly, FNAF 2 is firmly in 1987, as we see in the paychecks. And FNAF 0, which is what I'm going to be referring to the original Freddy's that we never really see as, is open during or after 1983 and up until at the latest 1986. This is established in FNAF VR with a FAS token. We also know, or at least it's very heavily implied, that Fredbear's Family Diner closes in 1983, since it's stated in FNAF 2 that the place has been closed down for a while. Given the fact that this is 1987 and we see the bite happen in 1983, this pretty much gives us a clear picture. We also know that Baby's Rental is at soonest open after Freddy 0, since it's stated in the opening crawl of Sister Location that the rental service was born to capitalize on the success of Freddy's after it closed. And we also know that FNAF 3, Pizzeria Simulator, VR, AR, and Security Breach follow all prior games in that order, even if we don't know whether Sister Location or 1 is the last game in the series chronologically, prior to FNAF 3. And while it isn't stated officially in the games, we can heavily infer that FNAF 0's location closed somewhere around 1985, or pretty close to it. FNAF 2 specifically states that the old Freddy's was left to rot, but clarifies that Fredbear's has been closed for a while, meaning that Freddy 0 is more recent than Fredbear's, and Fredbear seems to be around 1983, which gives it about 1984, 1985, or 1986 as our time period. We also know it can't be in 1987, because the MCI is in June 26th, which is already in summer. FNAF 2's gameplay happens in summer, unless they made all the toys, the new giant building, and all of the rebranding in like a month. So the latest the MCI can happen, or at least the latest that the Freddy 0 could close, would be 1986. This, combined with the novels are heavily implying it's roughly 1985, and the Frights books outright stating it's 1985, I think we can state that if it isn't literally 1985, it's damn near close to it. Now, when you hear problems with the Saferoom, you might think I'm talking about Follow Me, but that's actually the easy half of this equation, with William being the linchpin. We know that William dies in Springtrap and can't leave until he's put into the FNAF 3 location Fazbear's Fright, meaning any of his actions or appearances in games prior can't be after this moment. FNAF 2 makes a heavy emphasis on a prior night guard to Jeremy, the main player character of FNAF 2 for the first 6 nights, that someone was probably less than desirable, because they make this big stink about how prior employees can't come back and how the position became available. They wouldn't emphasize you couldn't come back unless, say, someone who was awful had to leave in the first place, so it's not the prior guard getting killed. We also know that someone, notably after this person is let go, wears a yellow suit and all the animatronics go ballistic after that. And we see, in the events of Save Them, a man with a yellow badge, in purple, wandering around messing with the animatronics and various things. And this, keep in mind, this man is standing around a big murder scene where a bunch of kids are killed around the building, so I think it's pretty safe to say this is William. So that means William is alive in 1987. And since the Freddy's 2 location only exists for a few weeks, we know this kind of narrows down Follow Me to being after FNAF 1, given that the animatronics are still there, and FNAF 1 sets up this whole theming of the restaurant's doing abysmally and it's set to close by the end of the year, and we see the building rotting with all of the stuff there, but no people. It's heavily implied this is after FNAF 1. And obviously, since William's still alive in 1987, he can't be dead before the events of FNAF 2. So overall, it makes no sense for William to be spring-locked before the events of FNAF 2. So Follow Me heavily implied to be after FNAF 1, but we can take this a little bit further. William, in some way, tells Michael to go to the rental service with the specific context that Elizabeth would be down there. But after he gets scooped and regains control of himself because he's no longer being worn like a skin suit, Mike doesn't seem to know where William is, especially since he has the big line,
"There is only one thing left for me to do now. I'm going to come find you. I'm going to come find you.
Which not only implies William being found is some important objective, which implies he's not just like around the house or just like skip town. And the context of there's nothing left to do implies in some category that Mike's already done a lot or has done some objectives, which you could take as meaning that Mike has already gone through FNAF 1 and 2 or done events and objectives like that, especially since FNAF 3 will be his second to last meeting with William. And in both cases, his goal is to find and, as we see in FNAF 3, burn William to death. So William not only has to live past Circus Baby's pizza existing, but he also has to live long enough to put Elizabeth in the rental service. And you could maybe argue that he's alive long enough for Mike to think he would still be around. But you could argue that he just found William's notes or something like that, or some old instruction set for him, and is going off of that, and not William literally living and telling him that. But that's very subjective, and we're not going to get into that too much. But if Mike has already gone through FNAF 1 and 2, because there's nothing else left for him to do, then you could argue, wait, why is there the whole odor thing and the whole firing notices? Well, this ignores one major idea, which is the withered suits, or the classic suits, depending on what you want to call them, stink to high hell. This is a consistent running plot point, that these animatronics reek. So anyone tampering with their systems, which we know Mike seems to do, would smell awful, even before he scooped. And no, this wouldn't make Mike a villain prior to sister location. There are several events in his story that would allow him to be motivated to try and stop William, particularly including if he learned in any capacity that William was a serial killer. But that is not here nor there. We're talking about the safe rooms, and like I said, that's the easy part of this whole dilemma with the safe rooms. See, if we apply how I do theorizing, Occam's razor, to the FNAF 3 calls, we get some weird stuff that's kind of hard to parse out. The first question really should be obvious, but it kind of comes with a slightly wavy answer. What Freddy are these tapes from? It should, by all accounts of logic, be Freddy 0, the only confirmed Freddys with Springlock suit. But in the tapes, the Springlock suits are decommissioned and not meant to be worn. And Spring Bonnie gets sealed away in the safe room, seemingly. Technically, it's never stated, it's just kind of implied because we only ever see it in the safe room after these tapes. And with just that thought, we kind of run into a slight hiccup. It's not really a full contradiction, it's just strange, which is how Golden Freddy's handled. Golden Freddy, which is a Springlock suit because it is Fredbear, despite being a decommissioned suit, is not only in the FNAF 2 building, which means it got lugged around. That's a separate building. There's no explanation of that it was already there. That means they took that out of it and put it into FNAF 2. And its AI is intact enough for Fritz to tamper with it. And we can see in the office that kids draw Golden Freddy. And since this is here from day one before everything goes to hell when someone wears a yellow suit on night 6, it kind of implies that Golden Freddy's still being used in the FNAF 2 location, even though the Springlock suit should be decommissioned. But that contradicts Golden Freddy's broken state, which was really weird if he's being worn around kid. But then again, why did Scott specifically make this image to label it the new Freddy's if this wasn't a clue? So why is this here at all? And this goes even further. Golden Freddy is not only back in the FNAF 1 location, which means they took it out of the FNAF 2 location and put it into Freddy's 1 again, but they repaired it, and it's almost actually brand new looking relative to what state it was in FNAF 2. It looks like a costume they could wear at the time. So what the fuck? Are the Springlock suits decommissioned or not? Why do they keep taking Golden Freddy around with them and fixing it if it's a suit you're not supposed to use? Another weird thing is Spring Bonnie is canonically in the FNAF 1 location, but we can't tell if the safe rooms have been sealed or not during the events of FNAF 1. Since the safe rooms aren't on the cameras or the map and can't be recognized by the animatronics, and Spring Bonnie isn't possessed because William hasn't died in it yet, it will never move into our line of sight. We can't confirm that the safe room has been sealed off yet. Now let's say we're willing to completely look all past that, and that's just a weird set of anomalies that we shouldn't worry about. Then it feels like these tapes are supposed to be during or around the time of the MCI. With the specific knowledge of this, once again, we run into some really weird chronological shit here. Assuming, since they largely interact with each other and kind of build off of each other, that these tapes are in chronological order, that means the Springlock suits being decommissioned is before the events of the MCI, and that the safe rooms are sealed somewhere around this time. Just to make sure it's clear, the order is the suits are decommissioned, the MCI happens, safe room sealed. Which is why it's so weird that they took a decommissioned suit into a location 2 years after they weren't supposed to use it anymore. But the real weird shit comes from Night 4 of Sister Location with Baby's dialogue. Phone Guy in FNAF 3 states that the incidents that caused the Springlock suits to no longer be usable was an event at the Sister Location in which there were multiple simultaneous Springlock failures. Keep in mind, one Springlock suit has multiple Springlocks, so it just means a bunch of these suckers failed at once.
You're inside something that came from my old pizzeria. I don't think it was ever used. At least not the way it was meant to be used. Too dangerous.
Which is frustrating for several reasons. Not only is the statement made with some level of uncertainty, but Baby's general unusual form of speaking and the weird way she places emphasis on things makes it kind of hard to read this. The phrasing "too dangerous" feels like it's implying the suit wasn't worn because, well, it was too dangerous. Why specify that otherwise? But that creates this whole chicken and the egg struggle. If the suit in the Sister Location was too dangerous to be worn, it can't be the suit that causes the suits to be deemed too dangerous. To kind of rephrase things a bit, because I know it's a little weird, if this is the suit that causes all their suits to be deemed too dangerous, then how could it have been deemed too dangerous to wear originally? And once again, the way it's phrased doesn't seem to imply that someone wore the suit improperly, which is just how I know some people interpret this, because the way you would say that is, I don't think it was ever used, at least not used properly, or something like that. You wouldn't say, not the way it was intended to be used, because the phrasing "not intended to be used" implies there was some like nefarious use, like stuffing a kid inside to have them killed. Then that raises questions like, why isn't the suit possessed? Shouldn't we see it moving around and all that in Sister Location, yada yada? Shouldn't that be part of Entered? And that also kind of goes against the whole too dangerous things with that whole connotation, so it just feels really weird to have this be the suit based on how Baby talks about it. Now, to an extent, I think you could brush that aside off of like, oh, maybe it's just not that important, or maybe Scott just kind of changed his mind, so the details are kind of fudgy when they're mudged together. And maybe that is the case. Maybe that is how we're supposed to handle it. The real weird shit with this being the suit in the Phone Guy tape is that this should be the suit that causes all Springlock suits to be decommissioned. If Spring Bonnie being moved is a nod to the MCI, not only does that imply that Circus Baby Pizza World exists before the MCI, but the Springlock failure happens before the MCI, and since Pizza World's only really open for one day, maybe a lead-up week of them testing things, or maybe someone using the suit wrong, or whatever, that would mean Elizabeth dies before or really around the same time as the MCI, which is just strange. And a reminder that the fun times are indeed meant to kill kids. I feel like people keep trying to dismiss this, despite this is such a heavily implied concept in the base game. Foxy and Ballora both have a specified Directive 7 that ties back to Baby that isn't listed properly in their blueprints and isn't listed properly in her blueprints. And they make a big deal in the opening crawl and monologue that there is some design feature that's like questionable about Baby, and that William won't let Elizabeth go near Baby. And Freddy has this whole stomach tank to hide kids in, which is like really weird if it's a safety feature. Like, couldn't he just pick the kid up and put them somewhere else? Why does he have to hide them in a stomach hatch that probably doesn't even have air in it? Consider them all together, since Foxy and Ballora both seem to have like luring and deter kind of stuff. You could easily see it as, oh, they get a bunch of the kids to go out of the room so there's only one kid, because Baby makes this big deal about how she loses control and changes when there's only one kid in the room. And then that kid dies, and Willem could, in theory, take out, or they could just move the body into Freddy, and then they could just keep repeating the process to move them around without anyone noticing. Or it could just be one kid per show, who knows? And since a lot of these features only really make sense if they're on stage together, like why build features that interact with Baby if they weren't meant to all be together, rather than being rented out individually like we see in the rental service, who we probably know that they're not meant to be for the rental service, they were probably meant to be in Circus Baby Pizza World originally in the first place, then that overall paints this picture where William made the 4 murder clowns before he had killed any kids in the MCI. Now, this isn't quite as absurd as some theories I've seen with William, but it still is kind of odd to have William's arc be like, oh shit, the sock puppet's walking around. Better make some murder clowns. Oh shit, Elizabeth's dead. Oh, well. I'm gonna put the clowns in the bunker now. Also, I guess I'm gonna kill these 5 kids. And these other 5 kids, because, I mean, just fuck this group. When I've got it, I'm gonna take the first set of kids and put them in the murder clowns. Yes! Oh god, I'm dying. The only kind of way I can see to circumvent this interpretation is really hinging on one specific line from the FNAF 3 calls, which is, the safe rooms are being sealed at most locations, which implies there's some quantity of Freddy's locations that makes it so they're uncertain whether all of them will be sealed or not, which kind of contradicts the earlier line of the sister location, which implies there's like 2 total, Freddy's Zero and Baby's Pizza World. And this creates some just weird ideas that aren't inherently impossible, just kind of strange. This implies the baby has been possessed by Elizabeth for 8 years, and if Molten MCI is true, that means the fun times were normal animatronics for those 8 years until Follow Me happens, at which point they get the remnant from the original classics, and William just kind of dies leaving them there. To kind of restate this all, this makes the timeline: Fredbear's opens, Bite Victim ends, or Charlie dies, doesn't really matter which order, Freddy's opens, Baby's Pizza World opens, the Springlock failures happen, Elizabeth dies, Baby's Pizza World closes, the Springlocks go down, the MCI happens, Freddy's Zero seals only Spring Bonnie away, Freddy's 2 open, they lug Golden Freddy with them, the DTI happens, they take the classic animatronics and Golden Freddy back to the original FNAF 1 location if you support that theory that they are reusing the original location for FNAF 1. That place declines over the course of years, it closes, William takes the remnant out of the classics to make the fun times, then goes back for Spring Bonnie and dies. Mike follows all the instructions left by his dad after tampering with the animatronics for years. Sister location happens. He becomes immortal. 30 years pass, he finally finds William, burns him. It doesn't work. Baby decides to get some roller skates. Henry burns everyone. Golden Freddy makes William play FNAF forever, depending on filler, of course. Then the Mimic has trauma, and he decides it's going to be everyone else's problem, too. So VR happens, Vanny grabs Gregory, makes him a rabbit lover, AR happens, the Pizzaplex is built, bullshit involving a giant yellow tree and white tiger may or may not happen, Gregory breaks free, then security breach happens. Now, none of that inherently is impossible. Like, technically, other than some weird phrasing and things you can kind of dismiss, there aren't impossible contradictions in that interpretation, at least from how I saw things, unless I missed something. But I personally just don't like the idea of Pizza World existing so close to the MCI, and basically William making the entire fun times after only seeing Charlie die. And let's just say, I think the technology itself was inherently impossible. It's just kind of weird for him to go back on it and regress to the point where he's now killing children by hand. And then once again, it's just weird to have Baby just be down there for 8 years with, like, nothing happening with her. But I guess the classics are just kind of possessed for that long, and we don't really think about that much. The only way to really work around this interpretation is a really unintuitive interpretation where the sister location in the game called sister location isn't the sister location mentioned in FNAF 3. But knowing FNAF, I probably missed something in Pressure or something like that, where it's like, oh, actually, yeah, we're 100% confirming that there was just another Freddy's that exists. I don't know. I just kind of wanted to bounce this to the community and see what their thoughts are before I make any claims. I'm not even sure I'm going to use this in a timeline video. I just think it's just something really interesting to chew on. But as you might guess from my tone, I'm not really in a rush to have this theory proven. I'm fully willing to just let this thing be debunked and move on. This implies that Elizabeth has been possessing babies